Teh Keng Soon. There are two dimensions of my interjection here. Number one is that the neoliberal economy has trickled up to such an extent that the global economy is stagnated. And Singapore's export economy is based on that assumption. Therefore, we are in a deep shit. Yeah.
To put it mildly.
Yeah, to put it, simply. And what do you think we ought to do? Second point is that entrepreneurship is being killed systemically because the rents are too high. Amongst other factors, rent is a major thing. And the reason why rents are high is because the government has a vested interest in raising rents, because it owns 80% of the land. And therefore, even every cup of coffee that you buy, you are actually contributing to the national coffers, right? Every flat you buy, at least 50% or even 60 or 2/3 of the price you pay goes to SLA, which goes into the national coffers. So this is why we have this strange dilemma. On the one hand, the global economy requires some strategic penetration by us for our own survival, right? But we do not have the kind of entrepreneurial savvy to do so because our SMEs have been killed. So what do we do?
Yeah, Keng Soon, you're absolutely right. The last 30 years has seen an increasing concentration of the benefits of growth in the hands of the few, right? In the hands of those who are lucky enough to have the right skills, the capital, the assets to take advantage of that growth. And hence, when we had the crisis, and what was government's main response? Things like quantitative easing, bringing down interest rates to zero. But who really benefits from those, right? Or who are those policies? Those policies of quantitative easing or zero interest rates are intended to spur the economy. How? By putting money in the hands of the rich. But we all know that the rich have much lower marginal propensities to consume. If you're going to give $100 away, you put it in the rich is not going to spend it, right? He's going to hoard it, or he's going to, at most he invests it. He's not going to spend. And so that upward distribution, right, of resources, of wealth, of income, of the last 30 years has created a situation where we have a serious aggregate demand shortage, right, arising from the global financial crisis, and no tools, or at least the standard tools of central banks, interest rate policy, and even unorthodox policies like quantitative easing don't work anymore. So yeah, I agree with you. Unless governments, and I'm not just talking about the Singapore government here, unless governments, are prepared to contemplate seriously radical policies like helicopter drops of money, right, giving money to people who are going to spend it, we're going to see quite a prolonged, not just a cyclical downturn for our export-driven economy, but quite a prolonged, possibly structural shrinkage of demand. The other source of pessimism, as if more was needed, is China, right? I mean, China is restructuring is moving away from an economy which was very dependent on imports of commodities, of imports of raw materials, but China is shifting towards a more domestic demand-driven economy, more consumption-driven economy, which again means that China is not going to be a big consumer to step into the shoes of the US and to some extent Europe in any time in the foreseeable future. So I mean that at the heart, I mean what you've described really is at the heart of the very pessimistic, quite gloomy economic outlook for Singapore and for other emerging markets as well. And that does not augur well for efforts to reduce inequality and poverty, because the standard line is if you don't have the resources to do this, we can't afford to do these things.
I'm talking about three topics in answer to the questions that have just. The first is Keng Soon's comment that we are a rent-oriented, rentier society and it has done great damage to the economy. And I can hardly agree more. Singapore's business environment, I think one of the biggest, highest costs, one of the most negative parts is the extremely high rents, and our rentals dispersion in terms of availability of low, cheap entry rentals is far worse than Hong Kong's even, for example. Okay, so the the policy thing to keep in mind, an alternative to keep in mind, is this. Unlike any other country, even unlike Hong Kong, who have their hands tied politically, Singapore government owns 80% of the land. Very few governments do. Okay, so in terms of land alienation policy, it's a huge policy tool which so far we have sadly neglected. Sadly neglected because all we do is insist on maximizing the dollar of land sales, right? And maybe we'll withdraw land sales a bit if the prices look as though, you know, it will increase land sales if they're too high and regulate a bit like that. But on the whole, we have shied away from boldly using the 80% of land that we have given, that we have already in government hands, as a result of what? Largely socialist land reform. The biggest socialist heritage the PAP government has given to the people of Singapore is acquiring and owning 80% of the land. And you and I, with proper policy from them, can benefit greatly if only they had the guts to do it. Okay, so they have the guts to do it. They could control rents with that volume of land ownership. We could bring them down. If not in aggregate, they could certainly bring them down in zoned or rent or ski or special areas. They could promote various kinds of community mom and pop shops, local. They could have zone areas for social enterprise. They could have big zone areas. For example, take all 3 campuses, which King Soon's idea has moved to the idea, as startup beds, right? We could use our land in a far more creative. We could have in situ long-term care. We could have in situ aging in place. We have all the void decks of the HDBs around for communities, old age care homes, which are not being used. All right, so we are not, in short, we can mitigate a lot of this, unlike Hong Kong, which have the hands tied. You know, Murray McLeod tied it all up in nature reserves, right? And you can't change a damn thing there in terms of the Hong Kong legislature. But in Singapore, we can, but we don't, right? We are as miserly with that, with maximizing land sales, as we are miserly in giving to the poor, to our detriment. We do not use our policy imagination in ways that could greatly benefit us there. That's the first point.